Greetings, everyone. My name is Tom Caswell, and this is the Hit the Limit Break podcast that steps away from the daily news cycle of the gaming industry to try and divine the industry's future, to try and put together the puzzle by speaking with those who are designing the puzzle pieces. My guest today is Jason Schreier, reporter for Bloomberg and author of several books on the gaming industry, including Play Nice. Jason's latest book here, which is The Rise, Fall, and Future of Blizzard Entertainment. Jason, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom. Very excited for people to read Play Nice.
We do have 5 questions that we ask each guest. I wanted to first ask, to you, what is the biggest difference now that isn't necessarily like obvious to laymen? What is the biggest difference now in the gaming industry from when you first entered it to where you are today?
So I wouldn't say I entered the video game industry, but from when I first started covering the video game industry and
Yes.
writing about the industry, which was 2009, the biggest difference is the ubiquity of games, or really, I should say the surplus of games. The fact that there are so many of them. When I started 2009, the idea of indie game development was kind of kicking off. This is the era of Xbox Live starting this whole process of allowing independent game developers to get on their service. There was no kind of process for getting on Steam unless you were a big publisher. You couldn't just put your indie game on Steam. So if you made a game on your own, it was very hard to reach people until Xbox started doing this thing. And then we saw the rise of these kind of hit indie games like Castle Crashers and Braid and a couple others at the time. And that really, we kind of in each subsequent year, we saw the world of indie games expanding more and more to the point where now they're everywhere. And like the concept of indie games being like their own little thing seems so antiquated now. Now they're just constantly ubiquitous, like I mentioned. And as a result of that, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of new games coming out every single week. And we've gone from a point of like heavy gatekeeping, restricting the number of games that would come out, to like so many, the floodgates being so wide open that it's impossible to keep track of them all. And that is both a good and a bad thing. It has kind of positive and negative repercussions, but that's the biggest difference. And I think is that the most I would say drastic effect on the video game industry compared to like of all of the trends that I've seen.
Yeah, I think it also plays into something that I kind of gleaned from your book, which is the expansion. You would think initially like the expansion of something would be great. It would be like sunshine and rainbows. Like, that's awesome. Like, it's getting bigger, it's popular, it's generating more revenue. But as your book points out, when you fall into that category, there can be some absolutely massive consequences that you do not plan for that can ultimately, well, cause, downfall might be too, but I mean, the fall is in the title of this book, so
Yeah,
downfall might
fall
be
is
apt.
accurate. Yeah, growth can be a real problem.
Yeah.
The curse of success, I like to call it. Growth can be a real problem.
So obviously you've been covering the gaming industry for a long time. You were doing journalism before that, covering things that weren't video games as well. But if video games were not a part of your life, how would you be spending your time?
These days I spend probably the same way I spend my time now, which is most of my free time I spend either with my children or thinking of ways to entertain slash raise my children. That's where most of my spare time goes these days.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate enough that I can play some games either in bed when the kids are asleep, or like during the workday. I get a couple hours here and there to play some games for work related purposes. So yeah, that's the answer. If I didn't have kids, it would probably be like reading books and like playing basketball and like other kind of
Okay.
normal hobbies. But
All right. You'd be in
kids,
the NBA if
yeah,
it weren't for
sure,
the
sure.
kids.
Yes, I would. I would be the 5'7" point guard of the. Yeah, I would. Yeah, but when you have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, that occupies most of your time.
Yeah, it makes it tough to, get contracts
Have
signed,
hobbies.
and yeah,
Uh-huh.
exactly.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. You can't sign that NBA contract when you have. Yeah, that's true.
is there a game that you have played recently that you believe to be emblematic of the future of video games?
uh, um, emblematic of the future. I mean,
In
when I
terms
play these
of
big
gameplay or story or however you want to kind of take it.
yeah, I mean, when I play some of these big AAA monstrosities, I think, man, this is a depressing feature of the video game industry, and that like it's also bloated.
Hmm.
Um, uh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like the future of games. I think I've always been impressed by games that do things that I've never seen a game do before. So like one of my favorite games in recent memories is the Curse of the Golden Idol, which is kind of like a narrative murder mystery game, deduction game, and it has some really unique ideas and mechanics that just do things that I've never seen before. And so I would look to that not because it itself like is the future of the video game industry, but because I think the future of the video game industry, at least for me, and what makes video games interesting is seeing kind of ideas we've never seen explored before and realizing that video games like haven't yet reached their full potential and we
Yeah.
don't know everything that a game can do. Because of the way games work. I mean, compared to like I don't know movies or books. Like you know what a movie can do, you know what a book can do. It might subvert your expectations and
Mm,
tell a story in like a way you've never seen before. But like the form and function are limited. Like a movie can only be something that you sit and watch on your screen, whereas a game because you're playing it and because there are kind of mechanics and verbs involved. We still don't know everything that is possible in a game. So it's kind of it's almost too bad that so many games just kind of rely on the same old tropes of like hacking and slashing and climbing and jumping and stuff when there's so many ideas that potentially don't exist yet.
I think again that plays into your book as well, and taught a lot of the things that kind of it grapples with about the history of Blizzard is has to do with the fact that something like Overwatch, something like Hearthstone was born out of a concept that people hadn't, they were fiddling with the adapting the trading card game into a digital format, and it really took on a life of its own, and created almost another like subgenre within the digital. Now we see card games that are explicitly based off of Hearthstone. And so yeah, I mean, I totally agree that like games like Case of the Golden Idol, which is getting a sequel, I think it's coming out this year or has already come out. Yeah, the expansion of what is possible in video games, we haven't even got hit the tip of the iceberg yet. What is one game that you would pick that if you could wipe your memory in order to experience it again fresh?
Um, there are a few I would say. Outer Wilds
Oh,
certainly. Um,
great
Disco
pick.
Elysium
Mm.
is another one. We'll have to play that from Return of the Obra Dinn. Another one. Yeah, there are a bunch. There are a
Sure.
bunch of games like that, I would say.
Awesome. And then final question before we get stuck into the book is, in your opinion, are we experiencing currently and in recent history, the last few years, post COVID, are we experiencing the most tumultuous time in the gaming industry currently?
Um, I I don't think so. I think the
Mm,
scale is bigger than it's ever been. But I mean, you and I talked a few years ago about my last book, Press Reset, which told the story about volatility in the video game industry
yeah.
and the layoff cycle and studios shutting down. And it's not like things have changed. Like, it's not like this current cycle is all that much different than that one. The
Yeah.
biggest difference is the kind of the scale of it all. So, because so many companies hired so many new people during COVID, the video game industry got bigger than it ever was. And then, when the video game industry started correcting and contracting over the last 2 years, a lot more people got laid off because everything was so much bigger in the first place. And so now this correction has just put thousands and thousands of people out of work, and they're all competing with one another for the same few limited jobs that are remaining. So it's much, much harder, I think, if you got laid off during this cycle because the scale is so much bigger and there are so many more people involved. But in terms of like the layoff cycle, it's just a continuation of the way that the video game industry has always worked. It's always been this volatile, hit driven industry. that sees even companies that make big hits like Irrational with Bioshock Infinite shut down for reasons that seem confounding and inexplicable to the people who work there. So that I think that anyone who's a video game industry veteran has learned that there's no such thing as stability in the video game industry, and I don't think that this year is too much different than previous years.
That is a great segue into us talking about Play Nice, because one of the first things that I was recognizing as I started reading the book was that, we have, I think, an idyllic view, and the book covers it, right? Like Blizzard of old was vastly different to the Blizzard in later years, and there is, as you say, the rise, fall, and future. The book segmented into these three categories, and there's definitely like a turning point, right, of the fall. But it was wild to me to read the early days of Blizzard, which you'd think would be like everything's going great, we're firing on all cylinders, but the scraping together that team had to go through to like keep everything on track, the ways they were developing games and trying to get them out the door, the various business deals. It's kind of clear to me that Blizzard was never in a stable place ever. Even when stuff has kind of hit the fan in the last couple of years, it isn't unprecedented within the company for things like that to kind of happen. And so do you think like Blizzard had ever known peace, or it just it was just like almost doomed from the get-go?
It depends who you are. I mean, there were some people who were there for 20, 25, 30 years in some cases who
Mm-hmm.
had a great time going to work every day and making games with like their closest friends. And time the culture might have changed over the years in significant ways, but for a lot of people, it was a really good time and it was an awesome place to work, and they just loved Blizzard to death. I think that something that, yeah, a lot of people don't realize, I think there's this kind of this belief out there that Blizzard merged with Activision, or a lot of people think Blizzard was bought by Activision, which is not the case. But there's this belief that Blizzard merged with Activision and that ruined everything. And before that, Blizzard was independent and able to do its own thing. And as the book traces and documents, Blizzard actually was only independent as a company for 3 years. And then in 1994, it was purchased. And then it shuffled between corporate owners for many years that
A
followed,
wild
each
roller
with their
coaster.
own each with their own sets of drama and craziness, from like SEC investigations of fraud to like misappropriation of funds from the French CEO of Vivendi. Like it's all sorts of drama that the book gets into. Um, and so, yeah, even if on the ground floor you are having a good time and coming into work every day and working on these hit franchises with like your dear friends and then hanging out with them after work and such and just having a blast, I think that there was always that corporate volatility at the highest level that I think the executive layer, Alan Adham and Mike Morheim and Paul Sams and a couple of those other people, they were able to do a pretty good job of shielding the company from, at least until
Mm,
later on, at least until the Activision days. But
yeah.
at least in the first 20 years or so, those folks were very good at kind of fending off the corporate pressures to the point where you might not even realize that you were facing them, even if you work there. But yes, the volatility was always there in some form or another, whether there was the business end or the cultural end. But
Mm.
again, it depends who you were. If you were a guy, it was a very different experience working
Of
at Blizzard in the
course.
90s than it was if you were a woman.
Right. Which obviously the book gets into, and obviously there's been public and, talks about the public scandals and all of that, which, I think really kind of solidified what I found most interesting about the book, being that, man, like, this is simultaneously more damning in a lot of ways than what has previously publicly been known about the company, but is simultaneously incredibly sympathetic. Might not be the word, but like you read some of this stuff, and the perception of the people on the ground and the kind of coincidences that line up in a lot of ways that like paint an awful picture if you're on the outside. It's meshed with like realities and like what is real, what is what is actually happening here, and it kind of speaks to the burgeoning size of the company. It gets so large that it becomes impossible to kind of clearly define a picture of what is going on. And yeah, that's just that was like my ultimate takeaway of, I was like, I'm mortified by a lot of the stuff that's in this book. I even have one specific quote about game development from Bobby Kotick that we're going to get to, that I want your thoughts on, because it blew my mind. But again, like, even someone like Kotick, I don't want to use the word sympathetic for Kotick, but the decisions that he was making and the people at Activision were making, you know, inherently evil without perspective. But when you kind of put it into the context of what the goings on were, it's just very interesting that it can kind of have this dichotomy. Is that something you were finding while you were reporting and looking into this yourself, of like, man, this is crazy, but also like, I get it in a lot of ways?
Yeah, I mean, as a journalist, it's really important to me to not view the world as heroes and villains. I don't really believe in. I don't believe that's an accurate way to tell stories. I don't believe it's capturing the truth. I think the only way you can really find the truth of a story, of a nonfiction story, or really any story, is to try to see things from as many perspectives as possible, and trying to get as many voices as possible and hear different sides of things, because it's very easy to come away from let's say the Activision versus Blizzard battle, and to see it as Blizzard good guys, Activision bad guys. And to me, it was really important not just to talk to people on the Activision side and hear what they thought of these Blizzard folks, but also to really try to see trace the history of why Activision was the way it was. And so, as an example, one of the big battles was always over Blizzard's inability to hit their deadlines and to get games out more quickly, or get specifically World of Warcraft expansions out more quickly. And that was always a big battle between Activision and Blizzard. Activision wanted Blizzard to hire more people on the WoW team, just like Call of Duty did, and get games out, get expansions out more quickly. And Blizzard, there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of resistance to that. And I think that kind of, to understand why Bobby Kotick and his team at Activision were pushing for that, you really have to understand their history, and Bobby's history specifically, and how he came up in this world, which is as someone who really was an entrepreneur and wanted to make as much money as possible, and wound up taking over Activision with that goal in mind. And his history is essentially taking these franchises that turn out to be hits, whether it's Guitar Hero or Tony Hawk or Call of Duty, and in his words, exploiting them in as many ways as possible, spin-offs and sequels and franchises, and every single year releasing a new one. And to him, it didn't really seem to matter that much if like one of those franchises, or any of those franchises like Guitar Hero or Tony Hawk, died along the way, so long as they made as much money as possible for him and his shareholders, and what he saw as his goal to grow the company every single year.
Right.
And so trying to understand that perspective and why he came about it this way, as opposed to the perspective of the Blizzard people who are like, we want to make fun games that we love to play, and that's our priority, not like hitting Wall Street numbers every quarter. It really does a lot to understand why all of this happened. And I don't think the book is gonna I don't think the book is gonna change people's minds about Bobby Kotick, nor is that my goal. But
No.
I think it's more helpful to understand why he did the things he did, when you're trying to understand what actually happened. And that, I think, is a more valuable exercise than just kind of dismissing him as a devil and then moving on with your life. Like, to me, it's way more useful and valuable and interesting to understand where he was coming from, even if you still want to dislike the things he did, and
Yeah.
kind of see him as a problem for the video game industry, which I think is a totally valid view. I think you can do that in a more informed way if you understand why it all happened the way it did.
Yeah, I think that that's totally on point. I think that it's, one thing that I want this podcast, in as small or as big a way as it's going to, I want it to be informative, and I want it to almost like teach people like what to look for in gaming, in the industry, going forward, and almost be like a guide. And I feel like the book in a way kind of acts like that as well. Like it's almost like a big warning sign of explaining why certain decisions happen the way they do, why certain people behave the way they do, and almost like how do we avoid getting ourselves in these situations and stuck in these decisions? And I agree. Like I said, I think that that there's stuff on here that really kind of, I see where people, not just Kotick but other people that have been painted in that villainous manner over the years, while I still am like, if I were to paint it black and white, would be like, there's the villain. I kind of get it. And again, as you said, storytelling, whether it's fictional or nonfiction, like the villains are people that ultimately have things that you can empathize with in a little bit of a way, and you can kind of see their perspective on things. That being said, there is one quote that I'm going to pull up. You speaking to Bobby Kotick wanting to annualize things. The one quote that like left my jaw on the floor, and I wonder if you even know what I'm going to bring up. Quote, and this is from Kotick telling someone their plan, I believe, for I don't know if it was for a specific game, but like his
Guitar
plan.
Hero.
It was Guitar Hero. Yeah, it does say Guitar Hero here, but I think he wanted to kind of use that as the basis for how every other game operated as well. Quote, I want to get to a launch every quarter, and then I want to get to a Guitar Hero launch every month. My mouth must have dropped open, is what the person that he was telling this to said to you in an interview. That is, I mean, I don't think there is a word for it other than insanity. Do you have more context for why he thought that was like a reasonable idea? Like, what would that even look like a monthly Guitar Hero launch? Is there more to say on that quote, or it's just like, no, that's completely ridiculous?
Well, so first of all, Bobby Kotick, the way that he operates is kind of as quote what some of his executives like to call him, like the unreasonable man, like, and it's kind of their job to filter his kind of wild proclamations into like an actual plan. Like he's kind of one of those CEOs that might just say bonkers things, and then everybody else has to kind of interpret that and filter it down. So I don't know if he literally meant that he wants a new Guitar Hero game every month. But I think that he did believe that players have kind of this insatiable demand for new content and new things and will keep buying them. And when they stop buying them, then he will just kill that franchise and move on to the next one. And that's just how he operated. It's interesting. I think something that's really telling is that he liked to hire not video game executives, but CPG
Mm,
executives, consumer product goods executives. And a lot of the people in his executive ranks were people from companies like Procter and Gamble, which is the company that operates like Dove and like Huggies and like sells diapers and
yep.
soap and stuff like that. And the reason for that is because that's those are just kind of efficient businesses where everything moves smoothly and hits deadlines, and you are just shipping products. And that's how he saw games, as just kind of products to be marketed and shipped. And he didn't see them as like art or like kind of experiences that like should be these like, and like I don't know, have greater meaning beyond just kind of selling products to people. And looking back at his backstory and his history, here's a guy who just kind of grew up like selling things, and in high school he was running businesses like chauffeuring limos from for his classmates on Long Island into the city for parties and stuff. And he was always the guy who was trying to make money, trying to make a buck, and then hold on to it and save it, and then use it to start more businesses. He dropped out of college to work on
Yeah.
a business, software business, with his college roommate Howard Marks. And so this is a guy who was not in it. Unlike the Blizzard people, the Blizzard people all got into this because they grew up playing games and loved games. Bobby got into this because he wanted to run a business and make a bunch of money. And I think understanding that is really kind of a key part to understanding why things played out the way that they did.
Regarding the book, what's also struck me as interesting about this book is more to do with you. Is the previous two books that you had written were anthologies in a sense, right? Like there were collections of stories across multiple developers, each chapter kind of dedicated to a game or a different studio. Obviously, this book very different, dedicated to one studio over decades and decades. And what first struck me in reading it was whereas previous books, because we were very focused on a bit more of a granular scope of a game or a studio, um, you could cover the majority of what was happening. But because you're a bit more limited here, because the scope is so much bigger, I was surprised how much we would jump forward in time. Like one page I was reading about, like, oh, they're trying to get this little game called Warcraft off the into development, and a couple of pages later it's out. They're talking about the success of that genre. Was that something that was noticeable to you as you were writing it, that like what was the experience like writing this book compared to the previous two?
Well, so the kind of the time jumping slash trying to fit in, trying to condense a lot of stuff into the story, that's all for narrative purposes. To
Yeah.
me, I get bored easily when I'm reading and writing. And so to me, I always want to make sure everything is just consistently interesting. And I think that people will find in this book that pretty much every page is full of some wild anecdote or interesting detail. And
Yeah.
so a lot of the kind of granular development stuff I just cut out. My first draft was much, much longer, and I wound up cutting out a lot of stuff because I wanted the narrative to move really kind of propulsively and just kind of not run out of momentum and just really carry people forward the whole time. So that was a deliberate decision.
Mm-hmm.
To answer your question about like what the difference was, I mean, it was very, very different type of experience. Writing an entire book about one story as opposed to an anthology. With both of my previous books, Split Zone Pixels and Press Reset, I kind of was able to treat each chapter as its own kind of mega article where I would approach it the same way I might approach a story on Kotaku or Bloomberg and write accordingly. Essentially, just structure it that in a way that I might structure an article. Whereas with this, I had a lot of kind of moving pieces to follow, and I did a lot of structuring and outlining. I was just like, okay, here's what's happening here. Here's what's going to happen here. Um, I fortunately the chronology helps, and just being able to go through in terms of like structuring the book in terms of like game releases. That was a big part of it. Just thinking in terms of like, okay, here's the game they released in this year. That's the important part that we'll get to here. Um, but yeah, very different type of challenge and very different type of experience. And also, it was a lot more fun for me to go in depth on a single company and to be able to talk to as many people as possible from that company and get a lot of information that I might not have been able to get otherwise. To me, it was a really valuable and kind of rewarding experience, I would say.
And I think also, one thing is, as I read more of the book, it goes back in time a lot as things become relevant. So like as you start to get to, like, say, Overwatch becoming a thing, you have to start introducing people that have been at Blizzard for a while but haven't necessarily been relevant to the story you're telling prior to that. So you do jump back and explain, like, okay, let's catch you up on this person, what their history is at the company, and now boom, we're here. And I completely agree that, like, uh, the the story is consistently compelling. Personally, if you have a copy of that rough draft, I would love to read it because I love those granular details. But I do think that what you have put together here is so compelling that if you know nothing about Blizzard, even if you're not a gamer, like, this is just such an interesting story. The title of the book, Play Nice, comes from essentially a mantra, or like a list of kind of company ethos for Blizzard. I think it's the third one. Play Nice, Play Fair is the other half. Was Play Nice, when did that title become crystallized for you as the title for the book? Was it something that you, going into writing, you knew because you knew that ethos, or was it something that kind of came to you later in the process?
And it was something that the way I usually title books or anything really is I sit down with a blank notepad file and I just kind of just type like word vomit onto a page and see what comes out. And at one point I came up with like I was like, okay, could it be like um every voice matters because that's another Blizzard
Mm-hmm.
value. No, I don't know about that. What about like bleeds blue, bleeding blue, something like that, and little to police. How about play nice, play fair? Oh, interesting. Okay. What if we just cut out the play fair? What if it's just play nice? And then I like the ring of it. I like the flow of it, and I like the kind of the multiple meanings of it. So I thought it worked nicely. But this was after just going through like dozens of potential names and just kind of whittling it down. And my agent and my editor were also pretty involved in that process too. A lot of just kind
Of
of back and
course.
forth.
What to you, you talk about the multiple meanings, which I think if you read the book is very clear. But what to you are the kind of like top meanings of the term play nice and how it relates to the story?
Yeah, I mean, to me, God, it's a lot of things. I mean, it's play nice is kind of there's some irony attached in multiple ways, both in the kind of the boardroom battles that were going on, in the kind of cultural struggles that Blizzard had over the years. Yeah, obviously there's the gaming aspect of it all and the company value aspect of it all. I just thought it had a nice ring to it, and um it felt right to me.
Yeah, it is. I thought initially it was like ice, like Blizzard, like it was a play on play ice. But because also you have like the ice fonts and the axe, and that was for some reason my initial thing. But then obviously reading the book, I was like, oh, this
It's
works
actually,
on so
yeah,
many levels.
it's like an Arnold Schwarzenegger in Batman pun. It's like a Mr. Freeze pun.
Play
Yes.
ice.
Play ice.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so as I mentioned before, a lot of stuff that happens in the book that we have seen on the outside, um, that comes up. Again, we have so much more understanding. One of the most interesting ones was around the launch of Diablo 3 and the auction house, which was originally designed as a way to just make sure that no one was feeling cheated, right? Like there was a monetary value fee essentially attached to every transaction on the auction house that would go to Blizzard, which was initially intended to create an equitable and fair kind of system that no one could like take advantage of. But
Yeah, because
obviously,
the first two Diablo games, it's worth noting, had a
yeah.
huge cheating problem, and that's what led into this.
And obviously, the public perception of that was like, oh, this was instituted as a way for Blizzard to extract money and to kind of obfuscate the fact that, oh, the game isn't delivering, um, good loot. Go buy some. And that was not their intention at all, clearly. And there were multiple situations, I think, in the book that was surprising to me that initially, like from the outside looking in, I was like, wow, like I would never have understood it or read it that way. And again, I think also the book paints a picture of like how the conversation that people are having on the outside can influence perception of a situation. What to you was something going into the interviewing people that you had probably a certain perception of that completely not necessarily turned around, but you're oh my god, my eyes are open to what was really going on here.
That is a good question. I think there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot that I kind of was surprised by, and surprised by kind of the motivations of people involved with, and a lot of assumptions that I made ahead of time that like um, weren't the case. Let me think. What's a good example of that? Um, hmm. I think Blitzchung comes to mind. Blitzchung is the streamer, the Hearthstone player
Mm,
who came out on a stream and like spoke out in favor of Hong Kong and was just like, hey, like free Hong Kong, and it caused a whole controversy and or sorry, I'm not explaining this one. Let me start from the beginning. So Blitzchung was he was this Hearthstone player. He won a tournament, or he placed in a tournament, and then he came out. He was interviewed on stream by these Blizzard casters on the official Blizzard stream, and he came out and he was like, free Hong Kong. And Blizzard responded by almost immediately suspending him for a year and also taking away his prize money. And this was seen by a lot of people as such a harsh reaction that it caused controversy, to the point where like politicians were sending letters to Bobby Kotick about it, like AOC combining with Ted Cruz to
yeah.
write a letter to Bobby Kotick. So it became a huge shitstorm for them. People on campus were like covering up the values on surrounding the orc statue in the middle of the Blizzard campus. It was a disaster. And I think a lot of people made assumptions about Blizzard's decision at the time, but talking to Blizzard executives and people who are actually involved, it was interesting hearing their perspective, because a lot of them were like, hey, like, this person used our platform to convey a political message, like hijacked our platform to convey a political message. We would have punished him no matter what that message was. It's like, it could have been anything. It could have been like, vote for Joe Biden. It could have been like, like I don't know, we need more oil drilling. It could
Right,
have been
which are
like,
the examples that are in the book.
yeah,
Yeah.
it could have been like, abortion should be legal for everyone. Like, whatever it was, it didn't matter. It just happened to be about China and Hong
Yeah.
Kong, which was this massive hot button issue at the time. This was around the same time it was obviously the Hong Kong protests were going on. The NBA had its own issue with like one of their owners tweeting in support of Hong Kong, and they lost lots of money as a result. It was really just kind of a firestorm of factors. And it was interesting hearing that perspective, and I was moved a little bit by it. And then I think that the consensus among Blizzard people was like, that said, we probably were a little too harsh with the punishment. Like, suspending him for a year and taking away his prize money might have been a little too much. And so they did ultimately reduce it. They were like, okay, we're not going to take away the prize money, and we're going to suspend you for much less than a
Yeah.
year. And that ultimately, and then of course their president at the time, Jay Allen Brack, apologized, and it was all kind of resolved in a way that I think people found fine at the time. But it was interesting hearing that, because you see that from the outside and you're like, oh, Blizzard is cozy with China. They have all these financial interests in
Right.
China. They're working on all these games like Diablo Immortal in partnership with NetEase in China. And that massive Chinese audience is a big part of their revenue. So it was easy to jump to the conclusion that Blizzard was just pro China and that's why they were doing this. So it was interesting to me to hear the perspective of executives who were like, no, it has nothing to do with China. It's the fact that someone hijacked our platform for a political message.
Yeah. A fantastic example of a million different threads kind of colliding at once to, as you say, very easily paint a picture of what was happening, but that was not the truth at all. And there's multiple instances, I think, in the book that are very similar and even surprising, obviously with the sexual harassment scandal that Activision was embroiled with. Obviously a lot of terrible things happening, but there was a lot of jumping to conclusions about certain situations and just unfortunate coincidences, but also like, as I think that chapter is titled Reckoning, if Blizzard had maybe addressed some of the more minor problems, which seem to be kind of minor in the sense of like compared to some of the allegations that were out there, those were more outliers compared to just like a kind of layer of sexism across the company that is born from where Blizzard came from. If they had just managed to address some of those issues earlier, they wouldn't have found themselves in the reckoning that they had. But it all came to a point that there was a lot of jumping to conclusions and corroborations and things like that. And you even, I think, also, what I found interesting, were very critical of the lawsuit from the state of California against the company and pointing at things that, are seemingly very unfair and actually created a lot of hurt for a lot of the employees at the company. So that was a very interesting read once we got to that point. But one of the things that I kept coming back to as I was getting through the latter half of the book was Titan, which was this big game that Blizzard was working on that was essentially meant to be the next World of Warcraft. It was meant to be the company's next big moneymaker. And it was seemingly a combination of it was a superhero game where by day you played just the civilian, and it was like almost like a Sims-like game. There was a lot of different things going on there that obviously didn't coalesce and led to the cancellation of the game. And then by night you did the superheroing stuff. That project ultimately completely collapsed, and eventually Phoenix Rising from the Ashes, Overwatch was kind of born from a lot of the ideas and specifically the artwork that was built for Titan. This might be hard to divine, but if Blizzard had managed to make Titan a thing, What kind of trajectory do you think the company would be on, or do you think it would inevitably find itself in the same situation with pressures from Activision, more influence from that company, the sale to Xbox still eventually happening? Or do you think that, like, Titan was the kind of crucial point in Blizzard's history that caused it to be on the path that it was on?
So backing up a little bit,
Yeah.
one of the reasons I mentioned earlier that the executive layer of Blizzard was always able to shield the company from corporate influences, and one of the reasons for that is because they were always able to deliver on a single promise, which is, "Hey, you let us do what we want. You give us extra time. You let us delay games if we need to. We will give you hits. We are." The Pixar of video games. We are a hit factory. We are a dream machine. We will make you games that make you tons of money. Just let us cook. Just give us time. And that was true for many, many years. And even when Blizzard merged with Activision in 2007 to form Activision Blizzard, that continued to be true until 2013. And that is when Titan was canceled, and it cost the company $80 million. It cost them 6 or 7 years of opportunity costs and kind of potential, that talent that was on it potentially working on other stuff, potential other projects that were lost along the way. It was just a debacle for the company as a whole. And it also, and this is the most important part, it said to Bobby Kotick, "Hey, that promise of like you just let us cook and we'll make you hits is no longer true. You just broke that promise, and you also we thought Titan was going to be the next big thing from Blizzard, and it is not. And now you need to explain to us what happened. You need to have your you need to do internal investigations. You need to get some adults in the room. You need to hire a chief financial officer to kind of get your books in shape. You need to do this, this, and this, and this." And that was the beginning of the Activision pressure era. And it ebbed and flowed over the next few years. It didn't really trickle down to the kind of the ground level Blizzard people until much, much later, 2017, 2018 or so. But it was the beginning, and it was the beginning of the end for the kind of the independent, autonomous Blizzard that everybody there kind of knew, and a lot of people had loved for years before that. Um, and that's also what ultimately led to Mike Morhaime, the co-founder and CEO of the company for a very long time, deciding to resign from Blizzard. So I think that if Titan had not been canceled, if it had come out and if it was a hit, I think that the Activision influence, it might have still happened, but I think Blizzard would have been able to stave it off for quite a while longer, at least until another failure or another kind of like sign that they weren't succeeding. So yeah, interesting bit of alternate history potential there. Yeah, ultimately it was a story. It's a story of Blizzard making a promise and having this kind of this philosophy that you give us time, we'll make you great things, and that actually failing and then breaking that promise in this case, and that being the first domino to fall of what would ultimately just completely change Blizzard.
It's also very interesting that Overwatch, the kind of the project that kind of spun out from Titan years later, the success of that, I think, also like led to more Activision influence, because then it was like discussions of esports, and that really created a window for Activision to come in and be like, cool, like, yeah, we'll take the esports, and that pushed so much influence on Blizzard. What do you think the future of, obviously we're in Overwatch 2 era, game is still putting out content, and obviously a lot of the promises at the initial start of what Overwatch 2 was going to be didn't pan out. Do you Are you very plugged into the current state of the game and where you think that's headed, or do you think it's just going to coast for a while, pretty much?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it coasting right now. They're still coming out with new heroes, new
Yeah.
skins. Recently, a few months ago, they overhauled the monetization system, so you no longer have to pay for heroes at all. In the past, it was you didn't have to pay for heroes, but you had to play for a while to unlock them all, or pay for them, pay to speed things up. Essentially, now that is no longer the case. So they are changing things pretty drastically. I think that the problem is that the vision for Overwatch 2 was PVE, and that all fell apart and got canceled. They did release a little bit of PvE stuff, but even that has now been canceled. And so because that didn't work out, and because Overwatch 2 wound up feeling quite a lot like Overwatch 1, just with different mechanics and like different team compositions, 5v5 instead of 6v6, and it was free to play instead of paid. So that therefore it had to have like microtransactions in some form, and Blizzard chose to go with battle passes and other stuff like that. So other than that stuff, it feels pretty similar, and it doesn't feel like it justifies the two on the end of
Right.
it. That said, I mean, they're still releasing stuff. Like, I don't think, I mean, Overwatch players are always going to have like periods of happiness and unhappiness to the way that any service game players will. But it's not like Overwatch players are looking at this and saying this is a dead game. Like, it's clearly
Sure.
there's still hundreds of people working on it, making new stuff all the time. There's like 3 to 4 new heroes coming out every single year. So I wouldn't describe it as coasting.
Sure.
Um, and yeah, they've definitely got more in the works. Like, Overwatch is not like StarCraft 2 where it's sunset. Like, Overwatch is actively in development. It's one of their key projects right now, even if the PvE stuff isn't.
Right. I guess I use the term coasting in comparison to the ambitions that were laid out in this book about what Overwatch was going to be. Like, comparative to that, it's like what Kotick and what the team wanted for it is just, it's so vastly different. And obviously you can go read Play Nice to find out more about everything to do with Overwatch, Titan, World of Warcraft, what happened to Warcraft 3 Reforged, which is such an unfortunate situation. People should absolutely go check out the book. Before we wrap up here, though, Jason, I did want to ask, because it does come up in the book. It's a game I love, and I know it's a game you at least loved back in the day, because I put a video together recently about the 10 years of Destiny 2, another, at one point, Activision published game. And I actually used a lot of your reporting to work on that video because you had a lot of insight, which I think since you switched over to Bloomberg, you haven't done as much reporting on Destiny 2, although recently I know you've written about everything happening with Bungie.
Not because I switched over to Bloomberg, because I stopped playing. That's
Oh,
the
okay. Yeah,
main
so I was
reason.
curious. Like, you have stopped playing. You are not a Destiny 2 player anymore?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that I love Destiny 2. I would say I love Destiny 1. That's the game that I spent the most time in. And
Gotcha.
the first 3 years of Destiny 1. And then Destiny 2 came out and I played that a bunch. I fell off around the time of Forsaken, like in the year that after Forsaken came out, which not coincidentally was also the year I had my first child, and Destiny became a lot more difficult to play. So that's when I fell off and stopped playing. And because I stopped playing and I wasn't in tune with like the goings on and the community and the day by day happenings of Destiny 2, that's why I stopped reporting on it in a granular way. I still do Bungie reporting, but
Yeah.
no longer the same type of like day to day Destiny like playing reporting that I did when I was at Kotaku and when I was actually playing the game. So that's the key difference, is that I really stopped playing it. And yeah, Destiny 2 never got its hooks in me the way that Destiny 1 did.
Interesting. And you never really returned, like you never came back for the final shape this year or any of that content?
Nah, I can't go back. Nah, too many other games to play.
I gotcha. Do you obviously they laid out a roadmap which is very different from their previous one. Do you have any top level thoughts on the future of that game at all, or you've really kind of put it in your rearview mirror?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people there are certainly optimistic about the new director, Tyson Green. I think he's got a lot of people's respect within Bungie. I think there's this kind of belief that is very accurate internally at the studio, that like they need to figure out a better way to onboard people and to get new players on board with the experience, because even for lapsed players like myself, it's become impenetrable. It's very difficult to like log in and figure out what's going on and sort through all the proper nouns and stuff. So that's kind of an important thing that they need to do. I don't see any of that happening in the next year or so with their current roadmap, but I'm sure that's part of their plans within the next few years. I think they should just rebrand it and call it something else, because the two on the end is still pretty awkward and weird. If this is going to be a live service game that lasts forever, which is the goal here. So, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can't see myself going back anytime soon.
Gotcha. Well, Jason, thank you so much for your time today. As I said, Play Nice, available October 8th, at all bookstores. What's the best way for people to go check out this book and pick this up?
Yeah, I mean, people can get it however they want. It's physical, digital, audiobook. So if you like playing games, it comes out the same day as the Diablo 4 expansion, Vessel of
Perfect
Hatred. So
timing.
if you want to play that while listening, you can get the audiobook. But my recommendation, my kind of personal soft spot is for indie bookstores. So if you got a favorite indie bookstore in your town, in your city, go call them up, ask them to order a copy of the book and get it there. That's my personal preference. But people should check it out in whatever way is best for them. Get it from the library if you want. Get the audiobook. Get
Hell
whatever you
yeah.
want.
And there's some signed copies that are being put together, or is that over? That was
That's over. That promotion is over.
Sorry, too late. They'll just have to come hound
But I
you in
will be.
public
I'm
to
doing a little bit of a tour. I'll be in New
Okay.
York. I'll be in Los Angeles. I'll be in San Francisco. So people can look out for me in the coming weeks.
Yeah, go follow Jason on various social platforms for all those details. Jason, it's been great to talk to you. I know you got a next thing, so I'm going to let you go. Thank you, everyone, so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Hit the Limit Break.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.